Well, I think it starts with our habits, right? And I think anyone who's alive today is interacting with technology in a different way than we did 10, 20 years ago. And when we change our behaviors, we change our brain, full stop. So then the question becomes, how much are these habits healthy or unhealthy? And then what is the line between habit and addiction? And I'm happy to talk about that. So the part of the brain that is in my mind, and I make the case in the book, clearly most susceptible is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the most interconnected region of the brain. It takes up about a third of the gray matter and uses about a third of our calories consumed. Importantly, it directs attention, emotion regulation, and memory storage. And it's critical for controlling task focus, impulse control, planning, and really how we visualize the future. It's what separates us from all other mammals on the planet. I like to say that a healthy prefrontal cortex is the difference between inattention and focus, impulse and insight, addiction and habit, and reaction versus reflection. And in the book, I use the metaphor of the prefrontal cortex as a conductor in your own personal symphony. And what that means is it really tries to orchestrate the different parts of the brain to create the experience we have in the world. And one of the consequences of constantly using internet and internet enabled technologies, including the smartphone and increasingly artificial intelligence all the time, all day long, is that we're stressing our prefrontal cortex out and we don't even realize it. And we start to use social media, media in general, and these devices and our habits with them as mood regulators. So when we get bored, we reach for the phone, right? We all walk around with a supercomputer in our pocket, and that creates so much temptation through the titillation of what's out there that we subtly become hooked on these devices and the applications that they carry. And that has profound impacts for our brain. I believe strongly, and I make the case in the book, that this is contributing to double-digit increases in mood and anxiety disorders, particularly in young people, over the last 10, 15 years. Now, the good news is, in your question, which is, can we do something about it? And is this change permanent? Is thankfully it's not, right? So one of the two big discoveries in neuroscience over the last few decades is neurogenesis. That's the ability to generate new neurons, which the brain can do, particularly an area of the brain called the hippocampus where memory is stored, but also neuroplasticity, which is the ability to form new connections. So just like we can wire our brains in unhealthy ways, we can also wire them in healthy ways. Let's start with where I start in the book, which is where we all began, which is at birth, right? And so the human brain at birth is unique among mammals in that only 10% of it is developed at birth. That means 90% of brain development occurs outside of the womb. And this explains why we have these networks of neurons that allow us to create profound social attachments, right? If you think about it, society says you have to be on the order of 18 years old before you can go off on your own and survive without parenting or without the kinds of support we all grew up with. That's a very long time. That's a very long time. So we form these attachments, and these attachments are really key, and they're based on social interaction. And that's one of the things that we are disrupting with social media and our habits around these technologies. Sadly, increasingly, we are introducing these technologies, screens, media to younger and younger children. And so when I was younger, the average age of regular media consumption was 4 years. Now it's 4 months of after birth. That's a stunning statistic. And we can talk about why that's so damaging, particularly for children under 3 years old. So one of the things we've learned over the last couple of decades from a neuroscience perspective is that children under 3, particularly under 2 years of age, have what's called the video transfer deficit. What does that mean? That means the brain is so immature that young children, babies less than 3 years old, have a very hard time, if not impossible time, translating information from a two-dimensional screen into the three-dimensional world. They just don't have the neuroscaffolding and neurodevelopment to do it. Now, if you put a young child or a baby in front of a screen and you show video, they will attend to it. They will watch it. And we know this from the Baby Einstein series. I don't know if you remember Baby Einstein, but it was developed in the 90s by a mom who wanted some educational content for her newborn girl and borrowed her husband's video camera and created some sock puppets in her basement with some music in the background. And a phenomenon was born. At one point in the early 2000s and late 1990s, it is estimated that 2/3 of the homes in the US with children in it had at least one Baby Einstein video. And then around 2007, article came out, an academic review of the impact of early screen exposure, including Baby Einstein. And what it found is that children who were consuming a lot of screen time, particularly Baby Einstein, were not only not getting smarter, they were falling behind. And that kind of proved to the world that early exposure was a bad idea. The question was why? And that's when we then learned that young children, particularly less than 3 years old, just struggle to take any information out of that two-dimensional screen into the three-dimensional world. And not only do they fail at learning off of a two-dimensional screen, they're also displacing what they really need, which is face-to-face, synchronized human social interaction, which is how over 1 million years we developed as a species, and we're disrupting that with technology today. And the first thing I remind people of is that you really have to define what we're paying attention to, right? So the amount of attention I need when I'm working on my taxes or working on a paper or writing something that demands a lot of cognitive load, a lot of thinking, is very different than when I'm washing the dishes or folding laundry, for example, right? So those tasks are very different. Now, that said, what our research showed a few years ago is that the more you multitask, and I defined media multitasking as doing at least one task with a media screen and then something else, and it could be watching TV and being on your laptop or watching TV and being on your iPhone. That's a two-screen multitasking environment. But it also could be having your phone next to you while you're reading a book and interacting with social media, which a lot of people do. And what we found, and other researchers have found over and over and over again, is that high multitasking does two things. It increases the error rate and decreases productivity. So let me say that again. Study after study after study has shown that multitasking of any type, but particularly with social media, increases your error rate and decreases your processing speed. So the question is, why do we do it? And we all do it, including me. It's because it's one of these brain tricks, right? You're working harder. And we have learned over time is that when our brain is working harder, it's probably working better. But it turns out in this case, it's not working smarter. And over time, we now know that chronic multitasking, particularly with media, can have an impact on rates of depression and anxiety, like I said. And we also know that students who do their homework with social media open or other technologies have worse grades, have poorer test performance, and overall less performance in school.